Standing silently in the shadows of the hallway, I stared into the large mirror to adjust the crisp white apron tied tightly around my waist. I am Joanna Williams, a 30-year-old woman who has spent years building a life out of nothing yet. Here I was standing in the very mansion I once called home. My sister grabbed my arm with a force that bruised my skin and leaned in close to hiss a warning directly into my ear. She looked me in the eyes with pure malice and said, "Shut your mouth, or I will ruin you," because she was terrified that I would reveal our humble origins to her wealthy guests. I remained calm and moved through the crowded ballroom to serve expensive champagne while enduring the mocking glances from my own family members. The atmosphere shifted instantly when Mr. Blackwell, the most powerful real estate tycoon in the country, stepped through the grand entrance and silenced the entire room. Instead of greeting the hosts, he walked straight past the trembling crowd and stopped directly in front of me with a knowing look. He ignored the confusion of the guests and asked in a voice that carried across the hall, "Do you want to take back what belongs to you? Because this entire party is built on a lie. If you want to see how a humiliated sister turns the tables and reclaims her empire from those who betrayed her, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the shocking revelation in the final act." Every crack in the Williams family began to sprout a long time ago when favoritism became the unspoken law of our household. While most children remember their childhood through the lens of warmth and playfulness, my memories are strictly defined by the stark boundaries of what I was denied. My parents, Victor and Elaine, never made an effort to hide the fact that my older sister Bridget was the sole sun around which their entire universe revolved. My father, whom I called Dad, believed that Bridget possessed a natural grace that would one day elevate the family name into the highest circles of California society. Consequently, every resource we had was funneled into her private tutoring, her expensive ballet lessons, and her designer wardrobe, while I was often left with the remnants of her cast-off clothes. The situation grew significantly worse when I reached the age where I should have been preparing for my own university education and future career goals. Instead of celebrating my academic achievements, my mother, whom I called Mom, sat me down at the kitchen table to explain that the family could only afford one elite education. She looked me in the eyes without a hint of remorse and told me that I needed to find a full-time job to support Bridget through her prestigious law school journey. I spent the next several years working double shifts at local diners and retail stores, just to ensure that my sister never had to worry about a single bill. Bridget never thanked me for my sacrifice, and instead, she treated my hard-earned money as if it were a tribute she was naturally entitled to receive. The ultimate betrayal occurred on a cold Tuesday evening when Dad called me into his home office with a stack of legal documents spread across his mahogany desk. He explained that our family was facing some temporary financial hurdles and that Bridget needed a substantial amount of capital to start her own practice in the city. He then pushed a contract toward me and demanded that I sign away my future inheritance rights to the plot of land our grandfather had specifically left for me. I realized in that moment that my parents did not see me as a daughter, but rather as a convenient financial asset they could liquidate whenever Bridget needed more. I hesitated for a brief second before Dad slammed his hand on the desk and reminded me that loyalty to the family was my primary duty regardless of my own dreams. As soon as my signature was dry on that treacherous document, the atmosphere in the house changed from cold indifference to active hostility. Mom did not even wait for the sun to rise before she handed me a small suitcase and told me that my presence was no longer required in their home. She claimed that since I had fulfilled my obligation to Bridget, I should now find my own way in the world without leaning on their limited resources. I stood on the driveway of the mansion in Big Sur and watched the front door click shut with a finality that echoed through my entire soul. I had no choice but to board a bus headed north toward San Francisco, with nothing but a few $100s and a heart hardened by their calculated cruelty. Living in San Francisco during those early months was a brutal test of my endurance, as I slept in a cramped studio and studied finance textbooks by the light of a flickering lamp. I understood that knowledge was the only weapon I could use to dismantle the hierarchy my parents had built to keep me in the shadows. I spent every spare moment teaching myself the complexities of market analysis and asset management, while my sister was likely busy attending high society parties on my dime. I eventually secured an entry-level position at a small investment firm where my relentless work ethic finally began to attract the attention of the senior partners. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to build an empire that would one day make the Williams name look small in comparison. 3 years after being cast out, I was no longer the small girl who kept her head down before the mental lashings of her family. The ruthless environment of the San Francisco financial district had forged me into a woman who understood the language of power and the weight of calculated silence. My career trajectory had shifted from a struggling junior analyst to a sought-after strategic consultant for high-stakes investment funds. During this journey, I relied heavily on my best friend Casey, who worked as a senior data forensic expert and possessed the skills to uncover any hidden financial trail. We spent countless late nights in our makeshift office, analyzing market trends while building a foundation for my own clandestine investment vehicle. It was during one of our routine deep dives into local property records that Casey discovered some startling information regarding the current state of the Williams family finances. She looked up from her monitors with a grim expression and revealed that Bridget had been spending money at an unsustainable rate to maintain her social standing. My sister had accumulated a mountain of high-interest debt and had even used the Big Sur mansion as collateral for several risky private loans. It appeared that my parents were completely oblivious to the fact that their favored daughter was leading them toward a total financial collapse. Casey leaned back in her chair and asked me a crucial question about whether I was ready to move forward with the next stage of our plan. I looked at the data on the screen and asked, "Are all the debt records of the Williams family now safely in my hands, Casey?" She nodded with a sharp smile and confirmed that we had successfully acquired the majority of their outstanding liabilities through various shell companies. She then patted my shoulder and told me, "Don't worry, Joanna, they will never suspect who their true creditor actually is." I felt a cold sense of satisfaction knowing that the very house I was kicked out of was now technically resting under my control. This was not about simple greed, but rather about ensuring that my parents and Bridget finally faced the consequences of their arrogance. As my influence in the city grew, I established a strategic partnership with the legendary billionaire Blackwell, who was known for his uncompromising approach to real estate. He recognized my talent for identifying undervalued assets and offered me the resources necessary to expand my operations into larger markets. Blackwell appreciated my discretion and the fact that I never let personal emotions interfere with the cold logic of a profitable business transaction. We worked together to restructure several failing corporations, which provided me with the immense capital needed to finalize my grip on the Williams family assets. He often reminded me that true power was most effective when it remained invisible until the exact moment of execution. Through a series of complex legal maneuvers orchestrated by my team of attorneys, I officially completed the process of taking ownership of the Big Sur mansion. The paperwork was filed under a private trust to ensure that my name remained hidden from public records and the prying eyes of my family. I knew that Mom and Dad were still living in that house, completely unaware that their daughter was now their landlord. They continued to send Bridget to expensive galas while their financial foundation was being dismantled piece by piece from the shadows. I watched the final confirmation appear on my screen and realized that the trap was now set for the upcoming engagement party. Every decision I made was driven by the memory of that cold night when I was left on the driveway with nothing but a suitcase. I did not feel a shred of guilt because I understood that the Williams family only valued people based on the amount of wealth they could provide. Bridget was still playing the role of a successful lawyer, while the reality of her bankruptcy was hidden behind a thin veil of designer clothes and borrowed jewelry. I closed my laptop and looked out over the San Francisco skyline, knowing that the time for my return was drawing near. The shadows had served me well, but the day was approaching when I would finally step into the light and reclaim everything they had stolen from me. 2 months before the party at the cliffside took place, an unexpected phone call shattered the silence between my family and me. I was sitting in my office in San Francisco when Mom's name flashed across the screen for the first time in years. Her voice carried no warmth or apology as she immediately demanded that I return home to work as a maid for the upcoming engagement celebration. She explained that the family was facing some temporary cash flow issues and needed to cut costs by using my labor instead of hiring a professional catering team. I realized that they still viewed me as nothing more than a tool to be used for the benefit of their social reputation. The real reason for this sudden invitation was that Bridget had successfully trapped my sister's fiancé, Grant Thorne, into a marriage proposal based on a complete lie. My parents were desperately trying to deceive Grant into believing that the Williams family was still part of the wealthy elite in California. They knew that if Grant discovered the mountain of debt they were hiding, the engagement would be canceled before the first glass of champagne was even poured. I felt a cold sense of irony knowing that the very house they were using to impress him was now legally registered under my own secret trust. I decided to accept the offer because it provided the perfect opportunity to witness their deception from the inside before the final legal move. When I arrived at the mansion in Big Sur, the air felt heavy with the same arrogance that had driven me away a decade ago. Bridget was standing in the foyer wearing an expensive dress that I knew had been purchased with a credit card she could never afford to pay back. She didn't offer a greeting or even ask about my life in the city before she pointed toward the servants' entrance with a sneer. My sister looked at my simple clothing and made it clear that my presence was only tolerated because I was providing free labor for her big night. She leaned in close to ensure that her words were etched into my mind before the guests arrived for the evening. Bridget narrowed her eyes and told me, "You are only allowed to appear in the servants' walkway, and you must not open your mouth to anyone." I maintained a neutral expression and looked directly at her, while I mentally noted the expensive jewelry she had likely borrowed for the occasion. I gave her a small, submissive nod to play the part they expected of me, while I gripped my suitcase a little tighter. I responded calmly to her demands by saying, "Fine, Bridget, I will do exactly what you want for this party." She seemed satisfied with my apparent obedience and turned her back on me to continue barking orders at the hired decorators. During the next few days of preparation, I used my access as a household worker to gather undeniable evidence of their systematic financial fraud. I spent my nights carefully documenting the forged bank statements and the hidden loan applications that Bridget had tucked away in the library desk. I realized that they were not just broke, but they were actively committing crimes to lure Grant Thorne into their web of lies. My best friend Casey provided remote assistance by verifying the digital signatures on the documents I photographed with my phone during my cleaning shifts. Every piece of information I collected was another nail in the coffin of the Williams family reputation that I would soon reveal to the world. I watched Mom and Dad perform their roles as wealthy socialites while they practiced their welcoming speeches for the Thorne family. They spoke about tradition and legacy with such conviction that I almost admired their ability to lie so effortlessly to themselves. Grant Thorne arrived a day early, and I observed how he looked at the mansion with the eyes of a man expecting a significant dowry. He had no idea that he was walking into a trap set by a family of ghosts who owned nothing but the clothes on their backs. I polished the silverware and prepared the serving trays with a silent focus, knowing that the stage was finally set for the most expensive lesson of their lives. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the mansion at Big Sur glowed under the golden lights to mask the internal decay of the Williams family. The fake engagement party proceeded with a heavy atmosphere of contempt directed toward those of us who were working to serve the wealthy guests. I watched as the local elite drifted through the halls while sipping on champagne that my family could not truly afford to pay for. Bridget moved through the crowd with an air of victory while pretending that her life was a perfect masterpiece of success and happiness. My parents were busy engaging in shallow conversations with potential investors to keep the illusion of our family wealth alive for just a few more hours. The situation took a dark turn when Grant Thorne caught my eye while I was carrying a heavy tray of crystal glasses near the center of the ballroom. He had clearly been drinking heavily and seemed to take a twisted pleasure in exerting his perceived authority over the household staff. Grant stepped directly into my path to stop me from moving toward the kitchen and looked down at my uniform with a disgusted expression. He deliberately tipped his glass over so that the red wine spilled across his expensive Italian leather shoes and created a dark stain on the marble floor. The surrounding guests fell silent as they watched to see how I would react to this blatant act of disrespect in the middle of the foyer. Grant looked me in the eyes and sneered, "Serve the wine for me and don't get this pair of shoes dirty with your poverty." He then pointed toward the floor and demanded that I get down on my knees to wipe the mess he had just intentionally created. I looked over at Mom and Dad to see if they would intervene, but they both turned their heads away to avoid acknowledging my existence. My own parents completely ignored the public humiliation of their youngest daughter, just to ensure that they did not upset their future son-in-law. I felt the weight of their betrayal once again, while I stood perfectly still and refused to provide the submissive reaction that Grant was expecting from me. The tension in the room was suddenly broken by the arrival of Mr. Blackwell, whose presence shifted the entire focus of the party toward the grand entrance. Every socialite in the room held their breath because Blackwell was known for his immense influence and his tendency to avoid these types of shallow social gatherings. Dad immediately rushed forward with a desperate smile on his face to offer a warm welcome to the man he hoped would save his failing business ventures. He reached out his hand for a greeting, but Blackwell ignored him completely, as if the head of the Williams family were invisible. The billionaire scanned the room with a sharp gaze until his eyes finally landed on me, standing near the spilled wine. Blackwell ignored the confusion of the crowd and walked straight toward the spot where Grant was still trying to exert his dominance over me. He stood between us like a wall of solid granite and looked down at the wine-stained shoes with a look of pure coldness. Grant tried to stammer out an explanation for his behavior, but the billionaire raised a hand to silence him before a single word could be formed. The entire ballroom was so quiet that the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs outside seemed to echo through the walls. Blackwell then turned to me with a respectful nod that signaled to everyone in the room that the hierarchy of the evening was about to change. The billionaire looked directly at Grant and stated in a firm voice, "Your shoes are not worth a single minute of this woman's labor." This statement caused a ripple of shocked whispers to spread through the guests because they could not understand why such a powerful man was defending a mere maid. Bridget rushed over to try and smooth over the situation, but Blackwell kept his attention focused solely on my reaction to his intervention. I maintained my composure and did not show the satisfaction I felt as the facade of the Williams family began to crumble in front of their peers. This was the moment when the power dynamics shifted permanently and the final act of my plan was ready to be executed. 10 minutes after the billionaire's chilling refusal to shake hands, the luxurious atmosphere of the party was suddenly frozen by a terrifying truth. Mr. Blackwell turned his back on the stunned crowd to look at me with a level of professional respect that silenced every whisper in the ballroom. He reached into his tuxedo jacket to pull out a leather-bound folder containing the final deed and the official acquisition papers for the entire Williams estate. The guests watched in total confusion as the most powerful man in the room addressed a lowly maid as if she were his most important associate. Blackwell signaled for his legal team to step forward and then spoke in a voice that resonated with absolute authority across the marble foyer. The billionaire looked at me and said, "Joanna, we have waited much too long for you to sign the final handover documents for this coastal villa." Bridget let out a sharp laugh of disbelief and tried to step between us to save what little face she had left in front of Grant. She screamed that I was nothing but a failed runaway who had come back to beg for scraps from the family table. My sister grabbed my shoulder to push me toward the servants' quarters, while she apologized to the guests for my embarrassing presence. She desperately tried to maintain the illusion of her superiority by mocking my simple uniform and my years of absence from their elite social circle. I calmly removed her hand from my arm and produced my own set of legal documents that had been prepared months in advance by my attorneys. I looked Bridget directly in the eyes and stated in a clear voice, "The only poor person standing in this room right now is you, Bridget." I then opened the folder to reveal the certified records showing that my secret trust had acquired every single one of the family's outstanding debts. The Williams family business and even the very roof over their heads now legally belonged to the woman they had cast out a decade ago. Grant watched in horror as he realized that the dowry he had been expecting was nothing more than a mountain of unpaid bills and fraudulent bank statements. The socialites who had just been praising my parents began to retreat toward the exits as the full extent of the financial disaster was exposed. I handed the forensic audit to my sister and watched the blood drain from her face while she scanned the rows of red ink and legal warnings. My parents stood frozen in the center of the room like statues of a forgotten era, while their dreams of a wealthy alliance crumbled into dust. Blackwell stood by my side to confirm that every corporation formerly owned by Victor Williams was now under the total control of my investment firm. The guests began to whisper about the scandal as they realized they had been invited to a celebration held by a family of bankrupt pretenders. Every piece of jewelry Bridget was wearing and every bottle of wine on the tables had been purchased with money that she did not actually possess. I explained to the remaining crowd that the Williams family had been surviving on lies and borrowed time while they treated their own blood with systematic cruelty. Grant Thorne took several steps back from Bridget, as if her poverty were a contagious disease that might ruin his own social standing. He looked at the legal documents and realized that he had almost tied his future to a woman whose only legacy was a collection of high-interest loans. The silence in the mansion was heavy with the weight of a decade of resentment that was finally being resolved in a single evening. I watched as the people who had once laughed at my departure now struggled to find a way to apologize for their earlier behavior. Blackwell offered me a pen to finalize the eviction notice that would be served to the current occupants of the villa the very next morning. I felt no hesitation as I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper to reclaim the property that had been stolen from me through a treacherous contract. My parents looked at me with eyes full of a sudden and fake affection, but I turned my gaze toward the window to watch the waves hitting the rocks. The empire in the shadows had finally stepped into the light to take back everything that was rightfully mine. As soon as the truth about the property ownership was exposed, the masks of the fake socialites in the Williams house began to crumble. The silence that followed my announcement was heavier than any physical weight, as the guests realized they were witnessing a complete social execution. Grant Thorne was the first to react by stepping away from Bridget with a look of pure disgust and calculated self-preservation. He realized that staying connected to her would mean drowning in the massive sea of debt she had hidden from him throughout their entire engagement. Grant removed his expensive engagement ring from his pocket and threw it onto a nearby table before announcing that the marriage was officially canceled. Bridget tried to reach for his arm while crying out his name, but Grant ignored her completely as he pushed through the crowd toward the main entrance. He made it clear to everyone remaining in the ballroom that he would not allow his family legacy to be tarnished by such a fraudulent alliance. My sister fell to the marble floor in a heap of silk and desperation, while the high society friends she had carefully cultivated turned their backs on her. The people who had been drinking our champagne only moments ago were now whispering about the utter humiliation of the Williams family name. I watched the scene with a detached coldness because I knew that every single one of them would have done the same to me. Mom and Dad realized that their last hope for a financial rescue had just walked out the door with Grant's departure. They suddenly turned their attention toward me with a look of frantic desperation that they tried to pass off as genuine parental affection. Dad stepped forward with his hands trembling as he reached out to touch my shoulder for the first time in over 10 years. He spoke in a shaky voice and claimed that they had only acted out of a misguided sense of duty toward the family's survival. Mom joined him in this pathetic display by crying softly and reminding me of the childhood memories we supposedly shared in this very mansion. My father looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "You cannot do this to your own parents, Joanna." I stepped back to avoid his touch and looked at them both with a level of indifference that seemed to shock them more than the financial loss. I reminded them that they had sold our family bond 10 years ago for the sake of Bridget's vanity and a plot of inherited land. I looked Mom in the eyes and stated firmly, "You sold our relationship 10 years ago, and now I am simply here to collect on that debt." There was no room for forgiveness in my heart because I understood that their sudden love was merely a reaction to my current position of power. The doors to the ballroom opened once again to allow my lawyer, Marcus Vance, to enter with a team of legal processors and uniformed security guards. Marcus walked straight to the center of the room and presented the official eviction notice that had been signed by a judge earlier that afternoon. He explained in a loud and professional tone that the current residents had exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before the locks were changed permanently. The guests were ushered out by the security team, while the legal processors began the systematic task of sealing every room in the villa. All the designer furniture, the expensive artwork, and the jewelry that Bridget had purchased with stolen funds were now legally under my control. Bridget began to scream in a high-pitched voice as she realized that the security guards were prepared to physically remove her from the property if she did not comply. She grabbed onto the grand staircase and refused to let go until Marcus reminded her that resisting a court order would only result in her immediate arrest. My parents watched in stunned silence as the life they had built on a foundation of lies was dismantled in less than 60 minutes. They were forced to gather a few personal belongings in small suitcases mirroring the exact way they had sent me away a decade ago. I stood on the balcony and watched as they were led down the driveway toward a future of poverty and public disgrace. 1 week after the mansion at the Big Sur cliffs was sealed to await public auction, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment looking out toward the sea. The cool ocean breeze felt different now because it no longer carried the heavy weight of a decade of hidden resentment and calculated planning. I watched the waves crashing against the rocks and realized that the chapter of my life involving the Williams family had finally reached its conclusion. My phones remained silent as I had blocked every possible way for Mom, Dad, or Bridget to reach out to me for financial assistance. They were now facing the reality of a life without the protection of a stolen fortune or a prestigious family name that had once opened every door. The actual outcome for my family was a stark contrast to the luxurious facade they had maintained for so many years through deception. Bridget was left with absolutely nothing after the forensic audit revealed the full extent of her professional misconduct and personal debt. My parents were forced to move into a small apartment in a neglected part of the city where they struggled to adapt to a life of manual labor. They had spent their entire lives judging others based on their bank accounts, and now they were experiencing the same contempt they once showed to me. I felt no joy in their suffering, but I understood that the laws of consequence were finally being enforced upon those who had lived without a conscience. I decided to cut off all contact permanently so that I could focus my energy on my growing career and my expanding philanthropic efforts. My position in the American financial sector reached new heights as Blackwell offered me a partnership in his most prestigious international investment fund. I used a significant portion of my wealth to establish a foundation that supports young women who have been unjustly abandoned by their families. This work provided me with a sense of fulfillment that the Big Sur mansion could never offer during those dark years of mental abuse. Every success I achieved was a testament to the strength I found within myself after being discarded like an unwanted piece of furniture. The lesson to be learned from this journey is that a person's true value is never determined by the title on their business card or the balance in their savings account. Greed and cruelty may provide a temporary illusion of power, but they eventually create a hollow foundation that will crumble under the weight of the truth. Those who treat their own family members as tools for social climbing will find themselves standing alone when the lights of the ballroom finally go out. Self-worth must be built from the inside out through integrity and the courage to walk away from toxic environments that demand the sacrifice of your soul. The Williams family learned too late that once you sell your humanity for a house, you will eventually end up with neither. This story of revenge and redemption has reached its final page, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for following Joanna's journey until the end. Your support and engagement have made this creative process truly rewarding as we explored the complexities of family dynamics and the pursuit of justice. I would love to hear your thoughts on the final outcome of the Williams family and whether you believe the punishment truly matched the crime. Please share your comments below to let me know which part of the story resonated with you the most during this 8-part series. Thank you once again for being a part of this community, and I look forward to bringing you more compelling dramas in the very near future.